Welcome back, my fellow Puffco Puffers. Today we are here once again with the pivot. Last time we talked a little bit about the accessories, and this time we're going to jump into how I go ahead and clean the pivot after every use and what I do after about a couple days of use or when I notice it's getting a little dirty, and also what I do just if I use it a lot throughout the day. After a couple hits, I do some upkeep. Let's just go over some of the things that you're going to need to clean the pivot, and it's actually quite easy. You'll need a Q-tip and some isopropyl alcohol. Quick note on isopropyl alcohol. This is the alcohol that I use. I find it on Amazon. Max Tight Isopropyl, 99.9%. This is tech grade alcohol. I really like using this because there is little to no water content, and it is very strong for stripping off all the stuff that we want to clean. Not only that, it is really good for all of these atomizers and electronics that we use because there is no water content in it. The other thing is I really try and avoid isopropyl alcohol from places like CVS or Walgreens, because the 91% or even sometimes the higher percentages at CVS and Walgreens, if you read the ingredients of what's inside of them, you'll see that it just says water and not distilled water, which means there can be mineral content inside of that ISO and can lead to cloudy glass over time. With your Q-tip and ISO, you have enough to clean the pivot just as is. A couple of things that I really like to just add into the mix to make life a little easier are terp wipes, the stick that come in the box with terp wipes, and my Air Blaster 8000. These are just some niceties to make this process a little faster and easier, but you don't really need those. The things you really need are just ISO and a Q-tip. For me personally, with the pivot, a lot of the times I will have this loaded or load it up and hit it and then walk directly into Target or a movie or something like that. A lot of the time I end up with a dirty atomizer like this, which is not something I typically do on any other device, but I don't really mind it with the pivot since the airflow doesn't really travel through the atomizer and the ceramic is really easy to wipe off after the fact. The one part that is quite difficult when it's cold is this top silicone part, and actually one of the big reasons why I don't use this silicone part and instead always use a glass top like this from Taco Dabs, which I talk about in my accessories video. You can check that out if you're curious to know more about this, which is an awesome top for the pivot. And the reason I always use glass instead of the silicone is twofold. One, the flavor I feel like always gets changed with silicone. And two, the silicone, even directly after the dab, I don't feel like this warms up enough to really use a dry Q-tip to wipe away all of the wax and reclaim. And I always end up shedding a bunch of Q-tip material in there, as well as the little airport hole in there. That ridge you see right here, that is very difficult to clean with a Q-tip, as well as this hole doesn't really fit my standard glob mop in there. So with all of that said, I try and avoid using this and I just cut mine off. You can dunk it into ISO, but keep in mind silicone is porous. So the longer it's in ISO, the longer it will need to dry. And as much as you soak it in ISO, eventually the reclaim just soaks into here and changes the flavor forever. This is good to use in a pinch, but my first suggestion with the pivot would be to get rid of this. So now that I have some reclaim left in there, I'm gonna go ahead and start a timer on it. I'm gonna let it get about halfway or until I see that the reclaim in there is getting a little soft and liquid. Then I'm gonna push and hold the button to end the session and it will just turn off. It looks like my pivot is a little dead from use. And at that point, I will go ahead and swab everything out. And this is typically what I do after every use. And I even make sure to get the Q-tip and go around underneath this upper silicone part, because I've noticed that flooding the chamber or over inhaling, that's where all of the dab goes, is underneath this jacket. So I do that after every hit. Then after every 4, maybe 5 hits, I will take a terp wipe and I will take the little stick from the terp wipe and I will go ahead and basically do the same thing that I just did. And I will wipe out all of this. I'll get really in there. The other good thing with the stick and the terp wipe is this is actually really good to get into the stock lid, the air hole up here, as well as the intake for the air here, and this little stupid bump in there. This is all very good with the terp wipe and the stick, which is why I really like terp wipes with the pivot. And I do that every, I don't know, 4 or 5 dabs or so, and I just really get that all done. Then I will take my terp wipe and I will go ahead and just wipe this contact down and give my whole pivot a nice little clean, just because of my dirty hands. And once that's all good, I'll go ahead and take a little cloth and I'll just wipe that down and make sure it is all dry. And you really want to make sure this part is very, very dry before use. Puffco has been having issues with corrosion here. As much as I think that is a major design flaw, I will go over why I think this is happening. So now that we have the easy parts all cleaned up, as I said, you can soak this in ISO if it really is nasty and dirty, but I try and avoid soaking silicone parts like this in ISO as much as possible. Now let's talk about the atomizer. Unlike other Puffco atomizers where the air intakes are in the top and the vapor has to travel through the atomizer, it does not do that on this one. So soaking this atomizer is a lot less important in between hits. That being said, this atomizer is not airtight. There is some leakage of both concentrates and air that happens throughout the atomizer that you can't see. About once a week, depending on how heavy my usage is with the pivot atomizer, I will soak this in ISO. And the way I do that is I just take my handy dandy stick from the terp wipes and I push on the bottom to unsleeve the atomizer out of the silicone. And as I keep mentioning, I don't like soaking these bits in ISO at all because silicone is porous. So if I can avoid it, I do try and avoid it. I'll take my terp wipe and I will just shove it in there and use the stick to kind of just wipe that out, make sure it's just clean, do the outside just for sanitation's sake. And then I will just dry that off, both inside and out. And now we are left with the atomizer. So both my atomizer and my glass top, I'm just toss into some ISO and let soak. There's nothing special about that. Every once in a while, if my glass top is getting really nasty, I will throw it in some Heady Eddies, which we're gonna go over in a video coming up soon. So hang tight for that. With the atomizer, and now this is the part that I was hoping to show you, you can see this tiny little hole there. Now, I'm sure this tiny hole has to do with something of the assembly of how this top part seats in there and holds the ceramic in there. But this tiny hole causes a lot of problems. I think both for overflow of reclaim, if reclaim gets in there, there's really no way to get it out or clean it. And also, if ISO gets in there, now that ISO is just trapped between the ceramic and the outside casing. So what I think is they factory cleaned these somehow and then didn't dry them enough or didn't blow them out or something, and then packaged these up and shipped them out. And that's why everybody got shipped out and had corrosion along the top part of the battery. And for the people that didn't receive theirs with corrosion, I think what's happening is they are dunking their atomizer in ISO and then drying it out, but not well enough, and a lot of that moisture is living inside of this cavity behind the ceramic in the casing, and it is slowly leaking out around these gaskets and other things here on the atomizer, and this little tiny hole here, and this slight little gap in the metal. And so all of that makes me think that ISO is getting trapped up there. So if you are dunking your atomizer, please be very careful and make sure you are giving extra time for this to dry out. And so that is why I like using the air blaster to help with this situation. So you go ahead and once you have that, you take your atomizer and you would just go ahead and dunk it in some ISO. Just let that get all of the reclaim out of the chamber. All right, so now that I've let that sit a little bit, we're gonna go ahead and pull this out. I usually let it sit for around 20 minutes. And I'm gonna go ahead and tap that out. And so now, once that's all out, I'm gonna dry off the outside, grab a Q-tip, and just really kind of go to town in there to wipe out any of the reclaim that's left. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my air blaster and I am going to just dry this out. And what I saw right off the bat was some ISO came out the side, really driving home the fact that ISO does go in that hole and it does get stuck inside the atomizer. So if you are soaking your atomizer, please be very careful with leftover ISO in there. So let's go ahead, blow the rest of this out and get it reassembled. Once I have it all blown out, what I'll do is I will actually just put my mouth on this side and give it a little puff or a sniff with the nose to really see if I can taste or smell any ISO left. I know that's probably not the best and healthiest way to do it, but it's been the best way to really see if there's any ISO left. As far as the water content in your ISO, depending on if you're using the 99% like me or 90%, it will need extra time to dry. So please just keep that in mind. I have been using my pivot a lot. I do clean my pivot a lot. I have completely avoided any corrosion on the top of my battery because I am very conscientious that everything is dry before I use it. So now that everything is dry, this part is kind of hard. You're gonna want to line up the 3 little dimples with the 3 shapes here, and then I get that kind of lined up before I even start pushing down. So I kind of get it seated in and then look from the bottom to make sure it's all lined up, and then push down on a flat surface. Get it really close, make sure everything is lined up, and then switch around to the top and just push down and in with your finger to get everything aligned. And then once I have that all aligned, I'll go ahead, throw this on. I will go ahead, make sure the device is on. I will cycle to white. And I will let it just run a cycle with no lid on. Because anything that evaporates, any ISO fumes or any water fumes or anything that evaporates out of here once this gets to temp and runs the dab, I want it to just kind of vacate out. I don't want it to evaporate onto anything. And so I just let this cycle run its entirety. I am doing this at my desk. You can see some stuff coming off. I'm not gonna say do this in a well-ventilated area, but just don't breathe any of this stuff in because it could be ISO, could be reclaim, could be little bit of water, but you're going to see some little puffs of smoke come off there. And I think that might even be some reclaim that was over flooded and trapped behind the ceramic. I don't know. Time will tell. I am going to do an episode here where I'm going to rip apart some Puffco atomizers to show you what's going on underneath in the parts that we can't see. But from the smell of this, it smells like just rosin. So my cycle ended, and that's it. I'm gonna do one more little just pass with the Q-tip just to make sure everything's nice and clean in there. And that about wraps it up. So thanks for watching. Remember to keep your device clean. And as always, stay lifted. Psst. Come hang out with us on Discord. Head over to my website to pick up some awesome stickers to support this channel.